Hello, it is Monday Fun Day, which means I get to talk about whatever the heck I want to talk about. And for the foreseeable future, that is going to be world building for my project in pre-production called Crow Story. What is being drawn right now is not Crow Story, it is a different webtoon / novel that is being webtoonized called The Books of Avo. It is a fantasy in like a 1920s inspired kind of setting, and there are dragons, dragon riders, and they smooch. I guess there's like one dragon and one dragon rider and they smooch, but it's being webtoonized, like I said. That's what's being drawn here. However, it is available in novel format on my Etsy shop and my itch.io store. It has super beautiful hand-drawn watercolor illustrations. It's amazing. I love it. It turned out really good. The webtoon version will take forever to come out, and it won't be as gorgeous because mostly I just want to share with you. I just want to share my stories with you. Today I'm going to be talking more about the Crow story. I have a whole playlist that goes into all sorts of world building, but I will try to keep it at least somewhat cohesive and understandable for those who haven't. And if you haven't had the chance, or if you enjoy it, I super recommend that you check out the playlist. I spent a lot of time recently actually going through the closed captionings for all of this series in particular, because it has so many weird names and fantasy jargon that I am making up, and I think it is incredibly butchered by the auto-generated things, even more so than auto-generated text butchers things on the regular. If you're not someone who needs closed captioning, it's still good because you get to see the spellings of the random words that I will slur and mispronounce, despite being the one to create them. So we are continuing on talking about the different provinces that are within this kingdom called the Divine Kingdom of the Lindworm. It is a world full of elves all the way down, and there are 12 elements that influence what kind of magic everyone has, but it also influences what sort of animal they look like. So basically everyone exists on a spectrum between elf and animal, and what element they have will determine what animal. And if they are more elf-like, they instead are like more magical. They're mages and they have powers. And if you want to get into all the different powers and learn what they do, there's a whole video about that. Today we are talking about Willrock, the earldom of Willrock. It is a tumultuous region, rife with tumults. It is a region that's under control of Lord Willrock, while it once extended out into the barony of Blackward. That is actually a province that we did talk about. But yeah, it used to extend out into the barony of Blackward, and because of issues in managing just the sheer amount of tumult in the region, it was then delegated by the king and given to Lord Blackward. So not everyone who lives in Willrock really sees themselves as living in the earldom of Willrock, and those that do consider themselves to be part of Willrock, they kind of live in the easternmost tiny tip of Willrock, and there's only about like 2,000-ish people that are like hardcore converted and down with being occupied by the Lindworm Kingdom. The thing about Willrock is, a little while ago, a few years back, they were doing a really bang-up job with taking over the land. However, the mages that are like indigenous to this area, they created a spell that kind of went out of control, and that spell is known as the Plague of Lilies, and it basically attacked anyone who didn't have the Sylvan element within them. So it attacked divine mages, divine fauns, like it just attacked anyone who wasn't Sylvan. For a refresher, Sylvan are like the fox people and the ones with like nature powers, hence why they were able to make this kind of like enchantment plague thing that kind of like took everyone over with plants and killed them. Excruciating terrible, awful. And when that plague spread across Willrock, they were able to reclaim a lot of their land. In recent years, it has shifted away from the Lindworm Kingdom even more than it was before. Despite this, however, the plague did end thanks to the Divine Kingdom. They were able to create like a magical sort of cure for it. And when that ended, they were very mad. They are now kind of returning to Willrock with like extra anger and hatred burning in their heart for the peoples that live there. And it's not good. It's just not really good in the region of Willrock. And in response to all of like the anger and the returning of the Lindworm Kingdom, equally the people that live there, the Druids, they have created a new spell that is starting to take hold, and it is not good. There's just a lot of bad happening. Willrock, like I said, is predominantly Druid. Actually, I don't know if I said that, but Willrock is predominantly inhabited by the Druid, and they're the original people of this land. They have their own language, their own customs. There are also some collections of people that are Hearth. Hearth being an element of magic that is based around like family and relationships, basically. There are some like people that live in the area of Willrock that are Hearth, not Druid, but they also were like originally within this region. And we talked about them in the last one, and they are the Northwest Hearth Witches, and they're the ones that have like the 4 gender roles, basically. They have like the 2 soul genders, and then the 2 like, you know, are sex-based kind of genders. So they also live up there on like northeast coast. So they're also kind of like OG. This is their place before the kingdom showed up. There's only like one religion other than the Divine Lindworm that's like a majority practice, and that's Northern Hazalian. Also a religion that we talked about in the last video. It's much more like amicable to the Divine Kingdom, but the Divine Kingdom is starting to like establish churches for like the Lindworm. Specifically, there's a church established where Lord Willrock resides, as well as in like some other major cities, even though they're not really in control of said major cities at this point in time. So yeah, the Northwestern Hearth Witches live there. They had a horrible time of things and were forced into like marriages and stuff and forced to work, and it's a really bad time. However, the majority of Willrock is not the Hearth Witches. It is, of course, the Druids. And today we are going to talk about the Druids. And they're going to come up a lot in a few other chit-chats we have. So we're gonna like absorb this information, right? The largest group is the Druids, and after the Plague of Lilies, the Druids were able to make the gains back and reestablish their territory, and these are starting to be like undone, like I was saying. This is especially the case because the Druids are losing like allies outside of their home region. Because of the Plague of Lilies, they aren't really loved by the Hearth Witches anymore. They do not like them. And the Northern Hazalian people, they also don't really like what the Druids did, and it's just kind of like endearing them a little more to the Lindworm Kingdom, which is not good for the Druid. And kind of in response to all of the plague and whatnot, there have been like lords and ladies that are Sylvan who have been allowed to move upward in the ranks of the Divine Kingdom when they usually wouldn't, and they have like started to move in, and they're a lot harder to deal with than having like something that directly just affects not Sylvan. That was like a lot easier to do a lot of damage. But as they move in with like more lords and ladies that are Sylvan, there's a lot of trouble happening. And there's an important figure in the Druid religions named Drelly. We will get into that, but basically she is currently living with Lord Willrock, and she is engaged to his son, and she was kidnapped from a city in Nyland, which we will talk about. one day after like this big raid that happened, and she's blamed for cursing Lord Willrock's son and turning him into a bear, and they are actually blood twins. Which I think I've talked about. I don't know if I have, actually, honestly, but like blood twins are just like, their magic is connected. Yeah, they share a magical sigil, and it's like a sacred bond in the eyes of the Lindworm, and because they share this, they are being forced to like marry each other. Yeah, so that's the basics of Willrock. It's a very like warm climate, and it's a lot of like tropical forests and rainforest and stuff. It's pretty fun. It's pretty neat. Let's talk about the Druids. That's what this is going to be about. So if you don't recall, the Druids came up in the very beginning when we were talking about the different types of elves. And Druids are all Sylvan, so they all look like foxes, and they have a pretty wide variety of what they look like. Uniquely so, the most common thing is that they have tails. Like, tails are just very important to them. They take real good care of their tails. They can end up looking like your traditional fawn with like the little fawn legs, but they also will have like fur all over and paws and stuff. It's a pretty wide range. They are both like kind of like an ethnic group is kind of what they would be considered, but they're also a religious group, a cultural group, and they share like a language. Like all of it kind of overlaps. I mentioned when I was talking about the northern hearth witches, the ones with the 4 genders, some of them speak a different language. They speak like the Druid language, so there is like some overlap that happens outside of like purely the Druids speaking the language, but it is incredibly linked to like what they look like, and them being Sylvan is pretty integral to it. So there aren't exactly like hearth witches that are following these traditions, if that makes sense. And also a refresher, like ethnicity is weird, and whether one is a mage or not a mage is highly influenced by environmental factors. It's not like a blood thing. It's not a blood thing. The only thing that's kind of a blood thing is what element you're born under, and it's like a 50-50 chance of you being like either your mother's element or your father's. As we were saying, let's first start by talking a little bit about the Druid language, I guess, because a lot of their customs and stuff, like the thing about language is like language is so tied to culture and stuff. You can learn a lot about a culture through like how their language system works. I didn't go super in depth with conlanging. That is like an art form that is beyond me, but I did get into naming languages, and I also like have like a general idea of like how things work, just to add like flavor, basically. The Druid language, it shares an ancestral language with like all of the Elven languages, but it is also like incredibly influenced by like the sea elves, because there's a lot of coast to the area where the Druids live, and it is considered to be like a very unsophisticated and harsh sounding language, and just kind of like archaic, I guess. Whenever you're listening to the different names and they sound like English or whatever, that's just like, in my mind, it's like translated from like the common Elvish language, or at least like the language that the Lindworm Kingdom speaks predominantly. So like the English sounding words would actually sound a lot more similar if they were like not translated, I guess. I don't know. That's one way of doing it, and that's the way I choose. The main reason I want to talk about the language first is just because the naming conventions are a bit weird. Not super weird. I think you can figure it out. Every family has a family name, and that family name is the matriarch's name. So women will find their like names by going on a like coming of age kind of journey ritual thing, where they go and they find a tree that is willing to share its name with them, and that's how they obtain their names. I'll get into the nitty-gritties in a bit. However, that's the basics of it. Once you find your name, everyone that then joins your family is then called that same name plus what their relationship is to the matriarch. And it gets kind of like really nitty-gritty, super like detailed, I guess. I don't know. So it's basically you get named your mother's name, and then it is followed by a describer of like what you are to your mother. So it's the first fawn child, or there's like the second mage child, and these are all like very common names. And a lot of the words kind of come from different like tree words, but then they're like synonymous with different like relationship words. So an example of this is the mother's name is like Hasha. And so like Hasha Lajigan would then be the first twin, and Hasha Shumigan would be the second twin. So if you had twins, you would name one Lajigan and the other would be Shumigan. And when you're like chit-chatting about stuff, like when it's within your family, you basically refer to each other with like Lajigan or Shumigan. But if you are like outside of your family, you might be referred to as just like Hasha, so just your mother's name. And if you were like specifically referring to the mother of a family, you would like just say her name twice. So it would be Hasha Hasha. I will just post, instead of going through this in my word brain, I will post a list of like all of these words for you, and you can just judge me. There's also like specific words for like adopted children. If like a woman ends up having a child before she has a name, the child then gets named in accordance to the mother. Well, I guess their grandmother. So it's basically whatever woman you are related to who has a name, that is what you are named in accordance to. And like once a name is like obtained by like the mother of like that child, the child will like continue to have the grandmother's name. Like it won't retroactively change in that case. The only kind of retroactive changing that happens, the only changing in general that happens, is when a fella finds a lady and he gets married, and then he is just called like husband, basically. He gets called Neja or Neshi. Neshi being like a fawn and Neja being a mage. So like you're either like fawn husband or mage husband. and that's your name. And if you get divorced, you then take your mother's name back and you're called Goki. And that just means divorced. So you're divorced. Your name is divorced guy. So yeah. Such is life, right? Anyways, so that's the naming conventions. So hopefully that makes a little sense as we get into the actual traditions and religion and stuff, because shocking twist, Hasha Hasha is actually the goddess of the Druids. So they believe in a bear goddess named Hasha Hasha and a two-headed sea serpent named Genna. And Genna has two heads, hence it being a two-headed serpent, I guess. And one is named Hasha Shumigan, and the other is Hasha Lajigan. So they're the twins. And Genna are Hasha's twin children. So Shumigan is on one end, and then Lajigan is on the other. They're like a cat dog. It's another cat dog serpent. Actually, I don't know. Is this the first cat dog serpent? I don't remember. Anyways, this is a little cat dog. Shumigan is always trying to swim to the north, and Lajigan is always trying to swim to the south. And together, as they pull against each other, they bring balance to the ocean, and that's their thing. Good on them, right? So they did that. And meanwhile, Hasha made the people of the southern land. And those people were deer and pigs and horses. And after creating all of her children, Hasha got really super heckin' tired, because it's hard to be a mom, and it's even harder to be a mom that like creates all of civilization. Like that's really hard. Like take a nap. She's a bear, she's hibernating, having a great time. And meanwhile, her son, Lajigan. Actually, I don't know if Lajigan is like a son or not. They're kind of gender neutral names, so I don't think it's actually specified. But anyways, Lajigan, her son, is watching her sleep, and then he decides he has a great idea, and he eats his mother, and he takes over the people and the animals that she made. He's like, ha ha ha, I am now in charge. It's a great idea. However, Lajigan forgets that he is a cat dog, so Shumagen ends up spitting out their mother onto the northern lands. It's like, whoa, Mom, where'd you come from? And so they start to hang out instead. For Shumagen, its mother then makes the carnivores of the land instead. And these end up being the Druid. They're like all foxes and stuff. And they take care of the trees and the plants and the insects and all the other wonderful things that Hasha made for the world. Meanwhile, Lajigan and its people are alone. They think that Mom is gone, let's party. And they go across the land and they just eat everything in their path. Little hungry deer and the little hungry worm. When they keep going up north, creating barren lands as they do so, Lajigan is then met with Shumagen's animals and peoples, the carnivores. And the carnivores eat all the deer and stuff, and they return balance to the earth. And that fixes everything. Everything stops being barren because there's like now a balance that is occurring. However, this is not really what Lajigan was wanting, okay? Like, Lajigan wanted to just eat the whole world. Like, be chill, guys. Come on, let him do it. And he's really mad that his mom did that. And he looks at, like, what they've created, and he sees, like, the mages and, like, the elves. And he's like, I could do that, too. So he uses his animals, and he turns them into the elves, the divine elves, actually. Lajigan's elves remain greedy. They continue to make the land barren, but they also interact with Shumagen's elves, and they're like, whoa, what a great idea. And they also start eating deer. So now they're eating the entire world and the deer. And furthermore, Lajigan's elves do not respect the balance of nature whatsoever. So they're like, oh, let's kill the carnivores too and wear their fur. While Shumagen's elves, like, some of them were like, okay, you know what, that is a good idea. I will kill foxes and use their fur. Some of them did that, but most of them didn't. Most of them were like, this is a bad idea. They stayed strong, and they knew that the only honorable fur is the one that Hasha gives them. So, like, the fur that they're born with, that is the most important fur, and they don't really want to give up that to become super elf-like or whatever. You know, Lajigan is super hecking mad about this whole thing. And, like, after, like, he makes his elves into elves, they can never have fur again. And, yeah, he's just really mad about this. And that's kind of, like, the origin of the divine kingdom. They're just a bunch of angry snake children. So, as I was saying a while ago, the most important figure in the Druid religious life is Hasha Dreli. And Hasha Dreli is the one who got kidnapped and is being forced to marry Lord Willrock's son. She is the chosen child of Hasha. Only one is chosen by Hasha to be her mortal child. Dreli is chosen when her magic awakens, and she's marked by the special sigil. And Dreli is kind of like the most powerful mage in existence and a religious leader for all druids. And when she passes away, they start searching for her to be chosen again by Hasha, because it just continues to happen. Meanwhile, petulant little Lajigan also chooses a child to share the mark of Dreli. Frickin' Lajigan, am I right, guys? The Druid call this chosen child Hasha Zeya, which translates to mean bagworm, or like basically hungry caterpillar that's like ruining trees and awful and a pest and terrible. Yeah, so that's Zaya. And Zaya is a representation of Lajigen's greed. And Drelly is really scared of Zaya, and they're kind of like attached. And if Zaya has power, he is believed to like try and kill her. It's just bad. Zaya's bad. Zaya is Lord Willrock's son in this case. He shares the mark. They're soul twins, basically. Drelly, the original, like the OG Drelly, she passed away in old age many decades ago. And when Drelly was chosen once more, Lajigen's elves were ready, as I was explaining, and they kidnapped her, and now no one really knows what has happened to her and what their plan is with her. And a lot of them believe that she's going to be fed to Lajigen, or she was already fed to Lajigen, and they look to the sea to see if Shumagen ends up like spitting her out. All of them are pretty certain that regardless, she will lose her fur and Zaya will be wearing it. Yeah, bad times. Alright, so what else is happening here? So Druids, they really care about the environment, and they have a lot of respect for Hasha and like her creation. And like plants are considered to be like the highest beings. And it is only ever really acceptable to eat ones that will regrow. Meat is eaten infrequently, but there is like an importance to eating it because like you don't want like an overabundance of herbivores. Meanwhile, carnivores, eating those is forbidden, and animals are considered to be kind of like the closest beings to Hasha, and therefore like animal features are highly valued. Yeah, like I said, like it's sort of like a punishment to lose all of your fur and be like Shumagen's elves. I hope any of this is making sense to you guys. Druids, they have a lot of different like practices and stuff, and they celebrate the awakening of a mage's power, and they do that by like blackening their arms with like a mixture of oil and ash, and this is sort of to emulate the black fur of a fox, because mages, they don't really have that fur going on usually, because having fur is related to having less magic in this world, right? So they dance, they sing, they praise Hasha for giving her power to the mage, and this is like the beginning of a mage's journey, and very few men will like go on a journey beyond this point. They're just kind of like celebrated for their magic, and then it's time to focus on learning to be a good husband and obtain a wife. you gotta learn those skills. You gotta build up the skill set to support your future wife and be a good husband. Anyways, at the end of adolescence, mage mothers will like turn their daughters into animals. So here is where the whole little journey to find your name comes in. So once adolescence is over, your mom will turn you into an animal if you are a girl. Daughters of fawns, on the other hand, and those who are trying to avoid this and really don't want to study magic, they're instead brought to a sacred grove. And in the sacred grove, elder witches will use rituals to appeal to Hasha, and they'll have her cast a spell instead. So this is witchcraft. Very frowned upon by the Lindworm Orthodoxy, as we have heard. And while many end up with like a weak spell that only really affects them in dreams, they have like a little dream journey as an animal and find their name. Others end up with some of like the most arduous, awful journeys. So like when it comes to like mage mothers, they'll choose what animal to make their daughters into. And meanwhile, non-mages, they are instead left to Hasha for her to decide. And like most of them end up being turned into like foxes and wolves and other carnivores. However, only Hasha is allowed to choose either like a herbivore or a bear. So only witches ever will get turned into either an herbivore or a bear. As an animal, what do you do? So as an animal, you go and search and find your connection to nature. You have to find a tree in the forest. And during your journey, women must discover their name. So as we were saying, they have to find an unknown tree, or they have to find a forgotten tree, and they have to ask that tree, like, could I maybe like share names with you, maybe, please? And if the tree says yes, then journey done? No. Not quite done, because you have to find your way back to being human again, or elf again. Fauns, they'll figure out, like, they'll like talk to the trees with the help of like an elder witch. And mages, on the other hand, are like expected to use their powers of divination to figure it out on their own. Mages, after that, as I was saying, they have to break their own transfiguration spell. Meanwhile, those who like go through witchcraft, they will only be returned to themselves when Hasha decides that it's time. While witchcraft doesn't always have like a super big effect, like I was saying, when it does, it can be like incredibly difficult to break. So like even mages can sometimes like not break witchcraft spells that happen, and you're basically stuck to kind of find the answer and figure out like how your journey is supposed to end. And some people like just never complete their journey. They never figure it out. They're stuck as animals forever. And like others, there is actually no end to the journey. This is the end. This is kind of what Hasha wishes them to be. And yeah, so some people get stuck in the case of witchcraft. If you go through magic, if you go as a mage, like it's inherently easy to undo the spell. So at the end of the journey, in theory, a woman will return with a name of her own, and now she can start a family. And she can do that whenever she wants. She's not like obligated to start one as soon as she has a name. She is, however, expected to take care of her tree. So like nomadic tribes of Druid will like visit their tree yearly. It's like a whole thing, while others will end up like living really close to their trees. And if the tree does die, you have to go on a journey again, and you have to find a new name. Family heraldry, like images and like art and stuff, like it is related to the tree that is chosen. And it is also related to what animal they took their journey as. These become really important symbols in like their religious practice and like their beliefs. The last thing that's kind of important to Druids is fire. So fire is super sacred in Druid culture. This is because it comes from dried plants, and plants are like the highest creation of Hasha, so they're seen as super important, and when they're all dried up, they create fire. And the reason for this is that anything that has a soul is able to burn. And if the dead are left to decompose, they will end up being like reborn. Meanwhile, if they are burned, their soul will be freed, and then they're like able to like turn into like a forest spirit. They kind of like, their spirit will like merge with the spirit of their tree, and they'll kind of like become one. And on the other hand, like men in particular, they end up being like buried so that they can be back into the earth and be reborn again. And you basically, you can't be cremated until you have a name of your own, because otherwise your spirit is just like lost. It can't really become a nature spirit. You're kind of screwed a bit. So yeah, like once a matriarch dies, like no one changes their name. They'll just continue to tend to the tree, and no one new will obtain the name of the family. And eventually everyone dies off and the tree is left to be forgotten. Like, you're not supposed to continue remembering a tree and remembering its name. Like, that's meant to like become like knowledge of the forest, sort of. And like eventually like people can take their journey and they might find a tree that was like once a druid, and they can gain that name again. And then they can also become the spirit, and they can all, mass together in spiritiness. So yeah, that is the Druid. They're having a rough go of things, as we will hear. Before we leave, because, why not? I'm just going to mention one last place, and that is called Devenia. And it is completely unrelated. I should have talked about this during the Bellmire thing. It's just on my list and I skipped it because it's so empty of information. But Devenia is like a province that's right next to the capital, the main province, I guess, Bellmire. And it is like a super populated province full of like elves that worship the lindworm. It's all good. There's like a small population of fauns, and there's a small population of meadow elves, and it's super hot. And there used to be centaurs there, but they were like driven the heck out during the Centaur Wars, which I guess we'll one day get into. But yeah, that's Devenia. I just needed to mention it because otherwise I'm never going to, and it's just gonna sit and be boring. It should have been talked about when I talked about Bellmire. Anyways, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. If you do, please leave a comment. I love reading your comments. They make me so happy. I said in the most monotone voice ever. No, it makes me super happy. Thank you so much. Also, you gotta like and comment. Wait, I already said comment. You have to like and subscribe. It's very important. All right, goodbye.